Hello and welcome to Conversations from the Adoption and Fostering podcast. In this episode, I spoke to Louise, an adopted adult and social worker who has adopted 3 children. Louise is honest in relation to her experiences and discusses her views on the assessment and preparation process, as well as the challenges of contemporary adoption. This podcast comes with a note of caution. Louise is open and honest in relation to the negative impacts of adoption on her relationship as well as their family's experience of adoption disruption. There's no neat bow on this conversation. As always, if you've experience of adoption, fostering or special guardianship from any perspective and would like to share that on the podcast, please get in touch through the Facebook or Twitter page, or you can email us at aandfpodcast@gmail.com.
Hi, I'm Louise. I am adopted. I am an adopter of 3 children. I am a social worker. I am currently going through divorce. I am going through crisis with one of my children and contemplating disruption. So I've seen it all. I've got every T-shirt, and I'm in an okay place today. But I think, you really get to appreciate every minute of every part of this when you have seen all the sides that the coin can carry, as it were. I adopted a sibling group, so they came as, I like to call them my bonus package kind of thing. They're fabulous, amazing, wonderful. My heroes. They are brave, strong, wonderful, beautiful, courageous. I could tell you everything about how wonderful and beautiful they are, but they are also tricky, complex, difficult, unique, needy. Hate to say that word, but it's true. And adoption isn't easy. I think I've probably battled some of the worst demons in my life through this journey. It did assist with the end of my marriage. I wouldn't say it was the cause. It was definitely not the cause, but it did show us who we really were, because the strengths and weaknesses really, really come out when you're in absolute chaos. And one of my children, unfortunately, is quite violent, which is why we're in crisis. I'm not going to go into that too much because it's very raw, but just to sort of highlight it a bit. I think as an adopter, being violently assaulted by a child is the most heartbreaking moment you could ever possibly go through. I think it's understated. I do not think professionals know how to work with violence towards adopters as parents. I think we are treated very poorly. And I think that's, if you're going to ask me what my bone of contention is with adoption, there's a few. That's one of them. I think my children came to me on a journey of finding a family, but they've taken me on a journey of discovery. You really test every tiny bit of yourself as a parent of children who've got such complex needs. And even on their very, very best days doesn't mean to say that's your very, very best day. I have so much empathy for adopters. It is such, and foster carers, because foster carers are still dealing with a lot of the same behaviours that we deal with as adopters. And whilst it's different because we have that word permanence, there is so many similarities.
Can I?
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, even your introduction kind of raised lots of questions.
Yeah, sorry, my introduction carried a waffle a bit there.
No, even just the first sentence, I think it made me sort of, right, okay, so you're an adopted adult who adopted. Yeah. Often people's own experience of adoption, people have lots of different experiences. So how are the two linked? Are the two linked, or is it just coincidental that that you went on to adopt?
It's linked, but it's also coincidental because, I'm very proud to be adopted. I'm very grateful to be adopted. Life wasn't perfect. It isn't, a ticket of gold. Here's your little lovely line up to, the Wizard of Oz and on your merry way. It still has its complexities, even though, I was a child who was relinquished rather than a child who'd been abused and put into care. There's a massive difference. And, I've had lots of conversations with my daughter about that difference. And it's quite interesting for us to both talk about that. However, I was always open to the idea of adoption, but it wasn't until, I crossed paths with infertility that it became, something I actually wanted to do. So, it was obvious. There was actually my dad who said, why are we spending all this money on fertility treatment when you know that adoption is something you love and cherish and are proud of? And obviously then we picked up the phone. And here we are, years and years later. And I love my kids and I love everything that they've given me, but I am in a rough place at the moment. So to say that it's easy or it's the best thing I ever did is too hard for me at the moment, because I'm going through quite a lot of grief. And I don't mean grief as in we say, oh yeah, they're giving me grief at work. I mean, I'm in the grieving process because I, as an adopter, believed I could put myself on a pedestal of being able to save the children, and I was naive and I was stupid, and I'm angry at that. I thought adoption was, I never thought it was heroic or anything like that, but I did think I'd be able to help more than I have been able to help with my children's emotional regulation, their etc. But it's so much more complex than that.
So I guess that the third part of that spoke, I guess, is that you're a professional. You're a social worker, so I guess there's a presumption that you're meant to know how to deal with this stuff, and you're true or not, but that's probably how people perceive it. So then, as an adoptee, and a social worker, was there a sort of a presumption that you'll be fine? Absolutely. But I think the difference, lots of people who adopt have difference of experience. I know people who've adopted after me and who were in the police or who have been in the armed forces or have done jobs with boundaries. And obviously as a social worker, we have boundaries. We have things we have to do and we have to do it on time, and everything's done to a certain degree of, well, maybe not everybody who's going through adoption and would agree, because social workers aren't perfect, but we try to keep things to a certain letter, don't we? And you can't do that as an adopter, and you can't do that with children whose lives have been so unregulated that they can't just sit in a box and fit. So being a social worker, whilst you get the understanding of what the true picture is of where they've come from, lends itself. It doesn't give you the answers. Neither does being adopted. That doesn't give me the answers because it's such a different set of circumstances. But I suppose it does give you some information. I've removed quite a lot of children from very, very chaotic environments, and some of them have gone on to be adopted. So that actually gives a lot of insight to me for my children. I can see literally more or less where their circumstances came to a head. But yeah, it's interesting. And I want to be a social worker for the rest of my life, and I want to be a mother for the rest of my life. So that journey is it's not the early stages, but I'm still on it. So it'll be interesting to see where that gets me out. I don't want to work in adoption, but because I enjoy the job I'm doing, working at the front of social care. But it does teach you a lot as a social worker and as a parent. So it's fascinating. Yeah. So can I sort of maybe take you back to the beginning of your journey? And how did you find the assessment process? Because I know that, with my social worker hat on, you've seen behind the curtain a little bit, haven't you? So what was it like going through the process, as a couple, being social workers yourself?
I think obviously I knew what what can be said in a meeting or in a information gathering session can look different on paper. And I think that was something I was always aware of. I know that's something that people challenge quite often, is that's not how I said something. So I was conscious of that when I was going through the assessment. Fortunately, my social worker was wonderful. The first social worker, because we went through the process twice, was wonderful. And I found it, can I say this? In hindsight, I think when I went through the adoption process with my children, it was too easy. And I think it should be changed. I think the system should be changed. And that's not a reflection of me. That's a reflection of the fact that if I've done a lot of training over the last couple of years on therapeutic parenting and lots and lots of other things. I'm not a therapeutic parent, but I do pick up a lot of therapeutic parenting skills that I like to use. And if I had done the training that I know now before I adopted, I think I'd have been able to help my children a lot more. So I think that process possibly is a little too easy.
So when you say easy, do you mean the questions you were asked, or was it that it, because the assessment is quite
the assessment, it wasn't the assessment that was easy per se. It was the process. Within 9 months of going through the front door, we had children. I know that's really, really quick. And I get that because we'd had the break from IVF, so we didn't need to wait for that. We'd done a lot of training, so we didn't need to do that. But I think that I don't think there's enough hurdles really. As in to set those people up to adopt. I think there should be more training about how to therapeutically support children who doesn't matter whether they come to you at a week old or they come to you at 7 years old, they are not going to manage everything the way a child whose conception has started in a positive light. Do you know what I mean? I've done a lot of thinking about the way my life started as being adopted, and I can look at my life and my children's lives and look at the things I suffer with and the things they suffer with, and I can see a link. We can't make up for that time, but if you teach us to parent therapeutically, then we've got a better chance of surviving with our children in our house than not in our house, if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm waffling again. No,
I mean, I think it's a kind of the eternal question in adoption is how do you prepare people for contemporary adoption? And then you have government statements, even just recently saying adoption should be, we should let more people in. We should get more people to the door. And
no, I totally. I know I'm sat here and hindsight's wonderful, but I really do think I would have been a better parent if I'd have known what I know now. And I was naive, and even though I was a social worker, I was naive to think that I was good enough with the knowledge I had. If I could turn back time, and I'm not saying that I could make up for everything with the children. I'm not saying I could be their therapist and their parent and everything they need, and therefore there would be no significant issues like we're suffering now. I just think I would have felt better, and therefore maybe some of the scarring that we've got going on now wouldn't be quite as bad. I think it's a child is born into a negative environment. Okay, sorry, I'll rephrase that. Child is conceived into a negative environment. That damage starts then. Yeah. Not when they're 6 months old, 18 months old, whatever. If a child is born into a negative environment, the chances are they're going to have some emotional issues in later life. And I didn't know that when I adopted. I thought I knew stuff, and I wasn't massively into my social work career at that point. And social workers don't know everything. But that has to be acknowledged. I've taken children who were little at adoption, and I've taken a child who was a little bit older at adoption. The damage is done because the birth parents were taking alcohol. They were taking drugs. There was emotional abuse and physical abuse. You can't undo that with just good parenting or wonderful parenting or loving parenting. It doesn't work. There's no magic wand. So for me, I think, a lot of social workers, fosterers get therapeutic parenting as part of being foster carers, but I actually think there should be significant training prior to adoption panel. I think I would have fared better, but who knows? Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I do have lots of conversations with adopters in sort of similar circumstances, and there's always that tension of there's a lot of ifs and buts, isn't there? And what was our capacity to absorb some of that? And did we think that we were different? We would buck the trend and we would love them. Yeah,
I mean, I knew that it wasn't going to be easy. And when I had, I was one of these people who unfortunately got it in the neck on day one of introductions from one of my children, who was completely adamant she wanted a daddy but did not want a mummy. And that was because of her trauma. Her trauma was related to females letting her down. That took 2 years to overcome. And it does rear his ugly head every now and again. But I fought so hard for us to be attached to each other, that I don't think that'll ever be undone, no matter how much, hormones and teenage angst and who am I because I'm adopted we go through. I think that was secured as much as we can. Like, and there's a hurricane coming on the rough seas. I think we'll still be standing on the boat together. Unfortunately, with my son, we don't have that. Well, we do have the attachment. Don't get me wrong; we are attached to each other, but it's a different seaside. It's a different situation.
I mean, you sound like you weren't naive, though.
No, I really wasn't. I really wasn't. Yeah. I really, 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 I absolutely 100% wasn't naive. I've been through my own adoption journey. I've been through my brother's adoption journey. I've been there as a social worker. I've seen people's journeys. I wasn't naive, but I still think if I'd have just had more information on therapeutic parenting, on, early life trauma, on the impact it has on the brain, on the wall that we developed as from conception onwards, I think I would have. I mean, maybe I'm just sitting in the past too much and thinking that could have made a difference. I don't know.
I mean, it's like you say, it's impossible to kind of turn the time back. But it sounds like, though, from the outset, it sounds like there was difficulties that you sort of anticipated to a point. But was there a moment where you thought, hang on, this isn't going to be this? I thought it would be difficult, but this is something else.
Oh, massively. But I've thought that a lot. I've never pulled the plug and I've never said I can't do this anymore. But I have gone and sat outside, driven down to the canal in my pajamas, sat in tears, not with any idea of doing anything stupid, but just because I had to escape.
Yeah.
I had to escape the intensity of not feeling good enough to my children. Because no matter who I am, no matter what I do, I can't repair them. And that's horrific as a parent. I love these children, whether they came out of me or they didn't come out of me. Like my parents love me because I didn't come out of them. The love has never been a question. But they have put me through more than anything else in my life, to be absolutely frank, and we've got specialists involved with one of our children at the moment, and they criticize me regularly for taking on such responsibility because I couldn't repair, fix, whatever we want to call it. But they're my lives. Those children are my lives that I didn't bring into the world, but I wanted to help succeed in the world, and the fact that I'm not able to do that with one of them is worse than I could ever imagine any pain to be. I've lost babies, I've miscarried, but that pain is the worst pain I've ever felt.
You talked about services. How have you found accessing post-adoption support and the level of support they've offered?
Shocking. I mean, I don't know whether it's because I'm a social worker, but I'm definitely treated better worse because I'm a professional. You know, there has been a situation, and I don't know whether I should talk about this or shouldn't talk about this, where I've had to physically restrain my child on the basis of protecting my other children. And I was offered such criticism for taking that choice, making that choice. I actually, as a social worker, took some advice on that. And I'm not going to say who from or what, because, you know, social work stuff. And that person of a senior level turned around and said, if she didn't take that stance to restrain her child and it went wrong, you would have been criticising her for not taking that stance. So how can this parent win? How is this parent able to safeguard her other two children and the actual child all at the same time if you're going to beat down her neck every time she moves? And actually, the condemnation that I have felt from post-adoption support brought crisis closer to a head than it would have done if they hadn't have stepped in and said, you shouldn't be restraining. They condemned me more than I condemn myself. And that's, I will never forgive post-adoption. I'm a professional social worker, and I am angry at a professional for treating me as if I was doing something wrong. When my every second breath, I couldn't shower, I couldn't poo alone, I couldn't eat alone, I couldn't have a cup of tea in peace. Every single movement or breath in this house was taken up by one child wanting to hurt the other two because he didn't get my attention. Can I go on the Xbox? No, you can't go on the Xbox. Okay, well, I'm going to go and batter my brother because I want to go on the Xbox. You're not going to go and batter your brother, but you're not going on the Xbox. Okay, so that was, 7-8 hours a day of pure violent aggression. And I'd pick up the phone to post-adoption support and they criticise me. That is unforgivable. How can a support, what we're supposed to rely on, be oppressive? How can it criticise to such a degree that common sense hasn't even come into the situation?
Do you think that they were slightly discombobulated by the fact you're a professional?
Potentially. And now I only work with them as much as I have to. We have to get funding and we have to get boxes ticked, and obviously I've gone through a separation, so that's caused issues, which I'm not going to discuss. But it's post-adoption support where I haven't felt any support. In 8 months, we've had 3 social workers. Well, I know how that feels as a social worker, and as I've been the social worker who's gone in. I'm saying, sorry, you're meeting a new social worker. This is not. Yeah. I accept that. I have no issues with that at all. I know how hard it is with our industry. But to be criticised by the people who are supposed to understand what crisis looks like is just unbelievable. I mean, have they not worked frontline? Because frontline social workers would never have thought anything like this of me. They wouldn't have criticised. They would have thanked me for safeguarding. And it came to a head when I was going through all of this, and my older son, I think, potentially could have killed my younger son. And I said, right, okay, but I've had enough. And then I decided that although I was going to work with post-adoption support, I was not going to ask for advice anymore. So I just told them what I was doing, because I am confident that I know how to safeguard children. That is my knowledge is there. I don't need anybody to help me think about that, especially not post-adoption support. So I'm angry at the system at the moment because of that. And I don't hear much positive stuff about post-adoption support. And I think maybe post-adoption support should be run by people who have adopted. And I think either that or frontline social workers who want a different job for a while. Because unless you've seen crisis, you can't give advice. And the crisis that adoption puts you through is, and I've got friends going through disruption and I've got friends close to disruption, is awful. And I think there needs to be more expertise. And I don't mean people who've read a book and sat on courses. I mean that feeling that you have when you can't fix something that you've been given to look after, to love, to cherish, to be wonderful with, and you can't, and it's heartbreaking. And people who work in post-adoption support should have some understanding of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of mirror that experience. Having said that, I've had some fantastic post-adoption support workers, but I've also had some that didn't get invited back.
Yeah.
And like you say, that often it can be just a tick box exercise for adoptive parents. And there's a whole cohort of adoptive parents, I think, who've just sort of become experts themselves because they've needed to be.
Exactly, and that's what I've done. I took a sabbatical. I went to my boss and said, I can't do this crisis and be a social worker at the same time. So I've taken 6 months off. What have I done with that 6 months? I've done every training course I could find. Until the psychologist who's assessing my son came out and said, will you stop? Will you just stop? Will you stop learning? Will you stop reading? Will you stop doing everything? Because actually you can't do any more now. And actually it's my job to safeguard my other children. And unfortunately my son's not living with me at the moment. Through my decision, not anybody else's. That's on me. And when he's older, I'll be the one telling him that was my decision. And he's living with his dad predominantly because that gives that break from his siblings. He can't hurt them when he's not living with them. But, you know, I keep exhausting myself. I keep staying awake at night, trying to learn more, just so that maybe I can have that one conversation with him that will get us back to okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. And you know, the guilt you carry for that is just amazing.
I mean, you've been brutally honest and, you know, frank about your experience. I think it's helpful because I think that we often see perhaps more palatable versions of adoption stories. But you're not uncommon, are you? You're not. No,
not at all. Not at all. And I think that, and there's some learning I've taken from this. You know, I know I really struggled with the therapeutic parenting. And I came to it too late. I think I was already in crisis when therapeutic parenting really came up. My son had already started with the violence and stuff. So if I'd have come to it earlier, maybe it would have been more palatable. I didn't. I can't change my parenting now because, well, I probably can, but not right now because I'm still grieving. I'm not. I know it sounds awful, and I have to explain this. Grieving doesn't mean I'm grieving my son because he's not in my life. It means I'm grieving the fact he's not living with me and that I'm not able to fix him. But therapeutic parenting is wonderful. And if anybody's going to go for adoption, then get as much knowledge as possible on therapeutic parenting before you adopt. Or even if you've just adopted and you're a year in, it's not easy to take it on board when you're at crisis because you literally, you're saturated. So I just picked up things I can do. You know, there's lots of bits of therapeutic parenting and PACE that I can do. And it's really, really useful. And I've sort of worked out that as a social worker, you know, I've worked with lots of children who are teenagers who've been adopted and they're living in crisis, and you know, they're drinking, they're smoking, they're staying out late, they're, you know, going through exploitation behaviours. I think the one key thing, and I know this isn't very therapeutic parenting, that I've learned through that is a lot of parents feel sad for their children. So therefore, release the boundaries a bit. Okay, yes, you're adopted, you've been through trauma, you've been physically assaulted or, as a child or emotionally abused. So therefore, when you come back after you've done something awful, I'm going to be lenient, I'm going to be soft, I'm going to be kind, and I'm not going to ground you and I'm not going to take your phone off you. And I can say now, I'm not telling people what to do, but I can say softening boundaries because a child is adopted is not what anybody needs to do. Those boundaries need to be firm and strict and there and secure for those children so that they can fall back on the fact that makes them feel safe, even though it might not make them say that they feel safe, of course. I think we've got to set children up for a future of the fact that society's not going, as adults, not going to let them say, do you know what? Oh, okay, so you had a bad childhood. We'll let you off the fact you've punched somebody. We'll let you off the fact that you've stolen something. We'll let you off the fact that you've done this, that, and the other. We have to set them up as society sees. And I think that's not very popular with therapeutic parenting. So I struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah. I heard a good sort of description or definition of therapeutic parent being high nurture but high structure.
Exactly, and I think some people get it. They think it's boundaryless, but it isn't. It's about boundaries. It's about that sort of firm belief system that you are. I'm making you feel secure by putting boundaries in place.
But I think you highlighted a good point, though, that I think that often if people find themselves, if the ball of string starts to unravel, at that point, their capacity to fulfill or absorb or implement boundaries or therapeutic parenting or embrace a new way of doing things is often just diminished to the point where they can't necessarily do it the way it should be done, and therefore it fails. And so people then, that's another thing I've done wrong. It's
exactly
kind of just compounds the issues.
Yeah, totally. And it is, you do think, oh gosh, I can't do anything right. So that's why I'm very careful. I pick and choose what I can and can't do. Yeah. Rather than going, I'm a therapeutic parent. I'd love to be able to call myself a therapeutic parent, because that means I would have got those skills and that knowledge before I adopted, and I didn't. And I wish I had. I wish for my children I had. Doesn't mean to say I've done an awful job. Anybody who really knows me will tell you that I've burnt my candle at both ends for my children so far, and I'll continue doing that till the day I die. But I don't think, and I think this is the other thing that I think is sort of a me thing. I don't think we should adopt, and it might not be very popular, this, adopted children as if we feel sorry for them. Okay, so I wasn't abused as a baby, but I was left in hospital on my own for 10 days. I wasn't wanted by any family member that I was put up for adoption by. And I was very lucky to go to a family who were ready for me. So I didn't spend long in foster care. So yes, I know and totally acknowledge that my adoption is completely different to my children's adoption. But I am grateful for being adopted. And I think adoption is the most beautiful thing in the world. Whether it works, fails, you nearly get there. You are like me in crisis. I still believe in adoption, and I still believe that we can, children deserve for us to have hope, and to have hope, we can't do it with, wow, you've been through awful stuff, let's feel sorry for you. A lot of people who are naive about adoption, come across people, friends or teachers or, people who've had to know that my kids are adopted. Oh, how awful. Oh, how terrible. Well, yes, it is, but let's give them the best life they can get. Let's teach them how strong they can be. Let's teach them how wonderful they can be. Let's not go, okay, well, we need to cushion coat everything for the rest of their lives. I'm not academic. I did go to university, obviously, but it was hard work for me, and my daughter's not academic. And I said to her, you don't box yourself in and say, I'm adopted, I'm not academic, my reading's behind, I'm this, that, and the other, and say, therefore I can't do. what we need to believe in is if we give the children as much as we can give, and sometimes that's not enough, but if we give as much as we can give, we can still get them to a place that hopefully is as wonderful as we want it to be. And I don't want anybody to sit and pity my children for being adopted, for living through trauma, because actually it could be the thing that gives them the best life. They lived through something hideous and horrible and awful, and you know what? That showed them how strong they were. That showed them how brilliant they were to get through it and see something wonderful on the other side. Yeah. Who knows? I might think completely different in 6 months' time. But
that sort of brings me to my final question, really. What does the future look like for you? I mean, that's crystal ball, but
that's a hard question for me at the moment. Professionals have said that we have to keep the children separated. That's heartbreaking. Sorry. I don't know. But I do know that my children are my children, and I will do everything in my power as a human, not as a superhero or as somebody who can stay awake all night doing research, but as somebody who needs to take a step back, because I'm not just my son's in crisis because of what's happened. I was getting to crisis. I need to take a step back and say, okay, I have to do what I need to do from afar for him, but the other children, I can do what I can from here. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know I'm going to be beside each child for the rest of their life, regardless of what they do, when they do it, and how they do it. I'm also going to continue to be a social worker, because children do live in awful, awful situations, and social workers do amazing jobs. And I'm going to try and learn as much as possible along the way about parenting, about children, about child development, about trauma, about humans, as possible. And occasionally I might try and have a life myself somewhere.
That's probably a good place to finish. Louise, thank you so much you've been so honest, and as much as it's not a well spoken about storyline, it's an essential one, because actually it's really common. So thank you so much, and I wish you well.
Thank you.